Welcome back, everyone, to the HNL Movement Podcast. And it's a very exciting episode planned. I know there's going to be some great conversations and a lot of great things shared. But I'd like to welcome Anthony Sinacore, who's the Vice President of North America for VALD. And they're a very innovative company that we're going to dive into. But yes, thanks so much for joining me, Anthony.
Andrew, thanks for having me. It's perfect. I'm here on the West Coast, California. Obviously, you being in Hawaii, we're taping this first thing in the morning, so I'm loving this morning podcast.
Yes, first thing in the morning, we're always running around, so this is when it fits into our schedule. So I appreciate you taking the time. And before we get into all of the Vault products and where sports science is going and the evolution of sports science, let's first start off with your story. So give me a little background. You're originally from California, I believe, but give me a little background growing up. What was it around sports, and were you always interested in something like sports science, even though it didn't exist when we were growing up? But what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. Honestly, I'm grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. So as much as I would love to say that I was originally from the West Coast in California, that's probably more starting back in the middle of the country. Grew up more or less raised in St. Louis my whole life, and then went to Indiana University for athletic training. So, the real backstory behind that, when I'm trying to decide what kind of career I want, what I'm trying to do with my life, I always gravitated towards sports. I was mostly playing basketball, football until then growth spurts came and everyone just started growing up and bigger around me. Couldn't play really football anymore. So then I transferred mostly into lacrosse. And lacrosse wasn't really a big sport in St. Louis or in the Midwest at the time. It was just getting really up and going. And I've always said to people, if you grew up with a brother or anyone who played lacrosse and put a stick in your hand before you reached high school, you were going to be all state easily. And I was not fortunately one of those people. I ended up really picking it up in freshman year of high school, but fell in love with it. And that's where, you really take kind of this blend between being fast and quick, but being, somewhat of a force on the field. And I loved it. And so that's what I really enjoyed going into high school. And all I really wanted to do was kind of play sports. And then I started thinking, okay, well, what am I actually going to have to do with my life? And as we were getting into college applications, I ended up getting into Indiana University. I really wanted to play college lacrosse. I had some offers from some D2, D3 schools, but I knew I wasn't probably going to go pro by any means either. And so I elected to go a little bit more of the academic route than take some of those offers and ended up choosing athletic training. Now, the deeper backstory is that my parents are in healthcare. My mom's a nurse. My dad's a physical therapist. So I always had kind of that health and rehab science kind of blend into my life. But I knew I didn't want to be a physical therapist. I just said it. I was like, look, I want to do something different. I want to cut my own path. And so then I go into athletic training school and, really just cut your teeth with learning diagnostics and assessments and, getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go to football practice. And it wasn't before long where I realized that everything about athletic training was great as far as the clinical application, but I wasn't really, vibing perfectly with the day-to-day and the quality of life. And I thought to myself, hey, if I'm going to spend 25, 30, 40 years into a career, I really want it to be something that I can see myself growing fully into. Now, professional sports and being an athletic trainer for the college or the pros, that was a lot of my coworkers, colleagues, classmates. That was all of their dreams. It really wasn't mine. I enjoyed more of the rehab side of it.
Mhm.
So then, sure enough, when I'm in, between junior, senior year, I'm looking at graduation, looking at what I'm going to do afterwards. I start realizing that, hey, physical therapy, slightly better hours, pays a little bit more. And then you don't have to worry about on a Friday or Saturday night, coach saying, hey, practice tomorrow at 5 a.m.
Yep.
And then I kind of liked all those pieces. And so that's when I then started switching, coming back to reality, having that conversation with my parents saying, hey, I think I'm going to go into physical therapy school. And my dad just classically thinking, I could just hear it in his tone of like, yep, I knew you were going to come back around. So that's when then I made more of the switch into a physical therapy track.
Hmm.
And it was right around that time where I didn't have, I think I needed like two more class credits, like right there to be able to just go right into physical therapy school from graduation. And so what I elected to do was basically, I put all this time and effort into being an athletic trainer. I passed the certification exam. So I decided to go back to St. Louis for a year and be an athletic trainer. So I was the sole athletic trainer at a high school.
Okay.
And I take so much of that experience when I look back on it and I realize that it built most of the confidence that I have today. Because you really have to be the one that is taking charge, taking the ownership and leadership, and being a 21-year-old taking care of, a full athletics department worth of athletes and
Yep.
injuries. You kind of have to learn pretty quickly of making sure what are your life or death situations, what can you do, what are you not allowed to do, given the Practice Act. And so it really did formulate a large part of my skill set. Meanwhile, I was also not only doing schooling for the remainder of those credits, but I was also a PT aide at a local physical
Oh,
therapy clinic. And that's where some of this journey is going to start in is where I was exposed to isokinetic dynamometers. Now, this particular clinic had six of them. If you think about biodexes or kincoms or anything, back in the day, now they're more HUMAC norms and the like. But that's where they had six. So everybody was on them for training, for testing, all the above. So I got a really good amount of experience there. So anyway, fast forward, I ended up going to the University of Pittsburgh for physical therapy school. And, naturally it's a grind. So
yeah.
those
Yeah.
3 years, they're just as fast as they are slow. And one of the funny stories is I remember going into my first semester of physical therapy school and going up to the at the time he was just a professor, but now he's the program chair, Jay Ergang. And I remember going into his office, and I my dad was a academician. He was very heavy in research and teaching. And so I walked into his office and I said, I'd like to be a part of some research studies. I'd like to help out any way I can. If you have any postdoc or PhD, get me involved. And I remember he just sat me down and said, why don't you pass anatomy first? Like, why don't we start with the basics? And he goes, if you pass your anatomy tests and you get through this summer semester, this very first semester, which is, the weed out semester, he's like,
Mhm.
then we could talk. And sure enough, the next day after I passed those exams, I went back into his office and I said, hey, I'm ready again. So
Yeah.
I think he had an inkling notion that I wasn't probably going to go away.
Mhm.
And so he ends up setting me up with a really, really good friend and mentor of mine now, Andrew Lynch, who was just about to start some research on knee extension strength. And so, throughout the physical therapy school, I'm obviously doing a majority of the academic side, but meanwhile, I'm also starting in on this research project, this data collection to look at knee extension strength and across five different parameters. Mostly just to compare some validation studies around handheld dynamometers, one rep max testing of leg press, knee extension on a one rep on a knee extension machine, and comparing it to what do you know, an isokinetic dynamometer. So it was also perfect because it kind of brought in some of that previous experience into then what I've already known, but of course what I've been learning in schooling this whole time. And so fast forward, I graduate from PT school, and of course I'm a glutton for punishment, and so I decide to apply for residencies.
Yeah.
And so yet again, I didn't do it quick enough. I'm always like two steps behind in a lot of those deadlines, and I missed the deadline application pool. And so then I decide, it's time to be a PT again. So very similar to being an athletic trainer for that 1 year. Before my residency, I went out and I practiced as a travel physical therapist. So I went down into Texas and just a little bit south of Dallas, near Fort Worth, and then into Temple, Texas, kind of near Waco. I was a travel PT and worked
Mhm.
mostly at home health settings and skilled nursing settings. So almost the exact
Yeah.
opposite of an athletic population.
Uh-huh.
And yet again, it helped me build my confidence and helped me understand that there's more to the human body than just key athletic performance and elite performance, and getting people from that phase three into that phase four and just taking them right over the edge into getting back in action. Now this is almost taking them from the very beginning,
Hmm.
very acute, very subacute, or potentially chronic issues that people have to go through. And, it just puts a different spin on life and a little bit more of, what we're doing in the profession. So did that for a little while, probably just under a year. Whereas then right before residency, I came back to Pittsburgh and did a little bit of TAing in the program. And so I was
Okay.
anatomy, TA as well. So just keeping a lot of those academic chops together. And that's when then I went to the University of Delaware for my orthopedic residency.
Got it.
So right then at that orthopedic residency is when the paper got published. And so, of course, I was working with the research team and our cohort together to really pump out a good, strong publication. And it finally got accepted into the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy. So we were really excited for that. And it was, a lot of hard work, a lot of time commitment going into it. And one of the I guess, highlights of my career yet to date is that the Andrew Lynch, who I had mentioned, he basically said, "Look, I think you and Andrew Evans, another individual that was in my class, we took a lot of time and energy into it." And he said, this is an opportunity where I think you guys would be good primary authors. And so push came to shove. I somewhat feel bad now for Andrew Evans if he's listening to this because we had a little bit of a pact where we had a poster presentation and the poster was accepted on a previous conference. He got the primary authorship of that poster. And so then it was my turn to get primary authorship. So I ended up getting it on the manuscript. It was pretty exciting. I owe just about everything to everybody else in that group, but naturally my name is the one that gets cited. And so it was yet again a very strong influence into my now career, going into objective tests and measurements and looking for any opportunity to have a clinically feasible solution that's not going to be a $70,000 piece of equipment
Yeah.
to be able to see, okay, what is the most accurate way of assessing the extension? So, definitely would recommend anyone to read that paper. There's probably some good papers on top of it now, but yeah, definitely helped formulate a large part of my early career.
Yes, awesome. No, it's funny how all of these little experiences or the way that you kind of pave your path helps you with what you're doing today, right? For all of us. I will say that you are one of the few and definitely the youngest ATC DPT that I know because that's a rare breed now, right? With all the program shifts and degree changes and things like that. It's very difficult now because we don't have a bachelor's ATC route to get your ATC first and then get your PT. And I think that also gives you a very unique lens, in addition to your experiences, but a very unique lens to how to actually apply some of these research scientific principles to actually help people, if that's performance in activities of daily living, even to improve that, but also for the most elite athletes, right? Before I touch on into all of the sports science stuff and the VALD stuff, I want to backtrack a little bit and explain. I know you played, lacrosse, basketball, football. Just give people an idea. And I think everyone our age and older knows that none of this technology was around, but give people a little idea as to what your sports schedule was like. I'm assuming you were playing pretty year round with those three sports. And did you have any inkling of, oh, we can actually collect data besides recording your one rep max in the weight room or how much volume you're doing, right? Pencil and paper. What was it like for you growing up? And was there anything that was exposing you to some of this kind of sports science before it actually hit mainstream market?
Great question. The unfortunate sad answer is very little to none. I ended up getting somewhat of a phobia of strength and conditioning principles because of high school strength and conditioning. We would naturally we go in and we learn the basic principles. They'd put our teams in there, but I always felt like it was something that was just a task. I didn't really see what I see now it is such a, strong improvement benefit to not only your physical body, but your mental body, right? And being able to see how some of those principles of strain and time under tension becoming, naturally a principle that you could probably take in anything throughout your life. But I wasn't exposed to much of it. One rep max testing, I did not enjoy the idea of failure, right? And that's kind of the point. If you're going to do one rep max testing, you have to hit failure at some point. I hated that idea. And it wasn't because of the physiological stress. It was just, again, more of that mental stress of saying, like, I'm not going to fail at anything. And when we were playing, even in collegiate athletics, there wasn't really much of this attention around monitoring or high level performance. And, as an athletic trainer for Division I athletics, it's not like I really saw a lot of that either. We had protocols, we had return to sport testing criteria, but we didn't necessarily, like, again, I think where the last 5, 10 years especially has gone in for all the professions, but we're getting away from this idea of you wait for a period of time, and then once you hit that time-based kind of criteria to progress, that's when then now testing gets introduced. And then it becomes pass fail. Well, if it's fail, then did you fail at one thing or did you fail at all of those things? These are things that I don't think I ever really went through my mind early on, whether I was just ignorant and naive or was actually not exposed to it. But yeah, not a lot. And obviously, you spend a lot of time between practicing and games and travel alongside the academic side that, if it wasn't built in, then we weren't doing it. And, for Indiana University lacrosse, it was a D1 sport, but it was a club sport too. So we didn't get all the premier times, practice times. Most of the times that we were given were in the field house at 10, 11 p.m. And so, practicing until 11 midnight and then, getting right back to bed and trying to get up for potentially even practice as an athletic trainer. So yeah, not a lot of objective tests or measurements at all. And it wasn't until kind of my first year after residency where I really started putting a lot more attention into some of these things.
No, that's a very good point. And I mean, a lot of it has to do with the technological advances too. It just wasn't as readily available or efficient to test. You would have to go into this lab setting or you need big bulky equipment with a lot of training, as you know, with your research experience, right? So it wasn't feasible yet for the kind of practical and clinical setting. But I'm glad that you brought that up because we're going to talk about kind of the evolution. But before we get into the evolution of sports science, it is relatively in its infancy stage, I would still say, in even professional and collegiate sports, although it's picking up a lot of traction really quickly. But before that, explain a little bit. So you had all of these experiences, right? You practiced as an athletic trainer. You saw a different demographic and population as a physical therapist. You had some academic and research background. What was and how did it come up that you transitioned into this role with VALD? And what was that like? Because they were starting to integrate all of these other different testing batteries probably at the time when you started with them. And what was that experience like? And how did you actually find that type of opportunity? And you seem like the perfect fit with all of your experiences.
Yeah. So kind of serendipitous in a lot of ways. So right out of residency, I ended up getting at this point now, 24, 25, really my first full job. And as a physical therapist, I'm super excited. I'm ready to just take the world on. And at that point in time, I really wanted to own my own practice. I wanted to be a business owner. I wanted to help out. And a large reason of why I did the residency was because I felt like my experience up to that point was really focused on kind of the second half of rehab, like we had talked about. And getting some of that travel physical therapy experience was very intentional, so I could kind of get there at the very beginning side. But then the residency I knew was going to give me just a big amount of almost like a fire hydrant amount of information across the board. And so coming out, I wanted to then almost kind of bridge into that next line of experience that I felt like I needed, which was working in a small business. And the salary offer I got, I've come to realize was a good offer. But at the time, you're thinking you're going to see all these zeros at the end of your check, and that's just not the case. And so what I ended up doing, and it's funny to think about now again, is that instead of renegotiating a salary, I negotiated to get a handheld dynamometer in the clinic. I said, look, this is what I want. And when you're in the residency, it's all about evidence-based research. It's all about making sure that you can practice at the top of your license with the latest and greatest evidence. But then, you come and realize pretty quickly when you're in your actual clinical field that, not everything is textbook and not everything is going to be exactly what the research can prove and show. And that's a lot of where sports science is getting to at this point. So anyway, I had that experience of using a dynamometer, collecting all of the various tests. What are the MDCs and the MCIDs of those tests? How frequently should you be testing them? So really focusing on the research heavy side of it. So that's what I loved and that's what I wanted to do. So then fast forward to then my next job, it was eventually moved over on the West Coast. There's a few jobs kind of in between then, but then I found Santa Barbara, and it was right around the time of COVID. So my wife and I kind of were traveling down into Santa Barbara looking for our next jobs, and COVID hit, so we kind of had to ride that out a little bit. Well, it was kind of a gift and a curse in a lot of ways because it gave me time to really figure out what in the area would be a good place to work. I had applied and worked for maybe 3 or 4 weeks at another PT clinic that I just really wasn't agreeing with some of their principles. And then I found another training center in Santa Barbara that seemed to just click. They had, in my opinion, one of the better models out there in healthcare. Now, of course, the luxury of being in Santa Barbara is it's a little bit more affluent, so they could kind of get away with this. But the premise was, the foundation, the premise was simple and what I love. And it was a membership model where there's a biomechanics lab, a physical therapy department, and then a large gym with strength and conditioning coaches. And if you come into this membership model, with your first evaluation, you get 1 hour with a physical therapist, 1 hour in the biomechanics lab. And then from there, because of your goals and everything that you're trying to do, we generate a strength and conditioning program, or potentially even a rehab program if they're active in pain. And so from there, then you get 1 more hour with the strength and conditioning director to be able to go through your program. And then it's a somewhat semi-private, a semi-supervised setting to where then for 30 days, they can go in as much as they want, do their program, and if they have any questions, someone's there. And of course, there's an upsell opportunity for it going. If you needed a PT plan of care, if you wanted one-on-ones with the strength and conditioning coach, or even any reassessments in the gym. But then every 30 days with the membership, you get 30 more minutes with the PT, 30 more minutes in the biomechanics lab. And then, of course, if there's any changes that need to be changed in your program, then you get this ongoing care. Just as long as you're a member, you just consistently get better and better. So that idea behind getting 1% better always really gravitated towards me. So as I was starting to really focus on the physical therapy side and really help all of the clients there, I started to slowly creep myself into the biomechanics lab. Now, this biomechanics lab was elite, state of the art. It had 8-camera motion capture system all the way around that was markerless. It had Vertec force plates, triaxial force plates in the ground. It did have an isokinetic dynamometer. Thankfully, it was kind of my weapon of choice at the time. And then a pressure instrumented treadmill. And so between all of these things, you get a really good look of what is needed, what's not needed. And I just kept diving in the more and more I could. And so we go back into that piece that you were talking about earlier with a lab and needing a PhD and needing to be able to, calibrate it and understand every little bit about it. That's what I enjoyed. So while I was treating during the day, I was really kind of tinkering in the night and trying to create a little bit more skill set on the biomechanics lab side.
Mhm.
And that's when then started some of the wheels started falling off around exactly what a biomechanics lab the joys and maybe the issues of it can lead to. And so, naturally, if something breaks, you start realizing that, you have to call a rep. And how long does it take for that rep to not only diagnose the issue, but come out and solve it? And then what is the cost associated with that? And taking reporting was a big issue, being able to take all this data that you could capture. And because they're paying, cash and because they're going through this system, you want to be able to provide a report that not only is meaningful, but actually it makes sense to them because, if we're not bringing that client or that athlete or that patient into the conversation, it's really not going to matter at all because you could have all the skill sets and all the knowledge of how they get there. But if they're not bought in, then they're probably not going to do the program. Adherence and compliance being a big issue. And so then I started realizing that one of the joys of being in a cash pay clinic was that I didn't have to do as heavy documentation because of
Mhm.
insurance reimbursement. I was spending just as much time, if not more, creating the reports at the end of the day and being able to determine what data is noise, what data is actually valuable, what data is just going to change by 4 to 6 week strength program, and what data are we actually going to try and move the needle on based off of all these goals. So it became a really good learning exercise for me to try and put my money where my mouth is and actually try and move any needle any which way. But of course, a lot of mistakes and challenges come with that as well. And that's right around the time where I found VALD because a VALD rep came into our clinic and basically kind of pointed at each system in the room and said, yeah, we have something very similar, if not exactly that system. And the beauty is that all of this data goes into one simple place. And then you can, click of a button and have a report that you can basically print out.
Mhm.
So I was pretty excited about that, just full stop. And then they started talking more about the subscription model. Now, that's probably the most unique thing that we can talk about with VALD as well, is that this subscription model includes everything hardware, software, warranty, servicing, upgrade, support, all the above. But it's not until you maybe have some of those pain points as a business owner, as a lab director, or the like, to where you might not have $500 to replace that one bulb or that one load cell. You probably don't have the time if it's really into your processes to wait the 2 weeks for that rep to come out and basically just tell you that it's broken, something you might have already known. And so that is when I started really having that light bulb moment of saying, wow, like this company not only has elite technology, but they're going about it the right way. They're solving some of these problems in the right way. And naturally, because of all of my previous history of being in objective tests and measurements, really understanding the value of that return to play testing, but also kind of where it needs to go, I kind of was already bought in. And so it didn't take me very much long thereafter to go on LinkedIn, find VALD, figure out what was VALD, what does it actually mean? And that's when then I ended up LinkedIn messaging. At the time, I didn't know this. I probably should have done a better job of actually figuring things out on LinkedIn as well. But it was the co-owner and the co-founder of the company and just said, "Hey, I'm a PT ATC with a little bit of research experience, very eager to jump on board if you have anything available." And within 24 hours, he responded and said, "Yeah, not only are we interested, but we actually have an opening in that area looking for someone very similar to your background." So within 36 hours, I had an interview, and within 72 hours of reaching out, I had a job
Awesome.
offer. So
Awesome.
very, very, happenstance in a lot of ways, but extremely eternally grateful because now I've been with the company just over 3 years. We've grown a lot, but we've always kept that clinical mission at the forefront of everything we're doing.
No, that's a great story. And there's a couple follow-up questions to this. So before we get into the vault stuff, at that clinic, can you explain briefly, like, what was the main demographic? probably a combination of, athletes and then your general pop kind of demographic. But what was it like? And then how were they able to get, well, I guess results and, data kind of speaks for itself if you deliver it or communicate that in the right way. But how did they get a lot of the buy-in for all of these returning customers? So what was the demographic and how did they facilitate kind of that interest and buy-in?
Yeah, great. So the main demographic, like you kind of nailed it. There's almost this two-part blend between these 16, 15, 16-year olds into probably 20, depending on where they are in either their collegiate athletic career, their high school athletic career, trying to get to the next level. And that was one of the big pieces that we would work on is, if you're putting the work in at a given level, no matter where you are, being as though you're relatively healthy and young and able to develop, your body's probably going to respond really well to very direct actions.
Mhm.
So that was, somewhat of the fun part too. But that's where then my previous experience led to me call more of the fun is the older adults. Right. So now we're talking anywhere between 35 to 65, 70, depending on all their goals, depending on what they're trying to do, and really focus on function. And
Mhm.
that could be picking up grandkids. That could be playing 18 holes of golf without having immense back pain and being let up for 2 days. But it could also be something like, hey, I play pickup basketball and I could just keep having recurring ankle sprains. And I'm trying to improve the stability around not just my lower limb, but then the core and everything we know about kind of going up the kinetic chain as well. So very similar to most outpatient clinics as well. I'd say there was a good plethora of different pathologies, but the demographics probably stayed within those two ranges. And everything came around buy-in, right, and
Mhm.
culture.
Mhm.
We worked really hard at making sure that the brand didn't feel like it was only for the older adult
Mhm.
or only for the younger athlete. Because naturally, older adults want to feel like athletes too, and they are in a lot of ways, weekend warriors and athletes in their own mind. And so, seeing some of those younger youth athletes getting after it and being resilient and basically falling over and picking themselves right back up, and they see a little bit of themselves in there, and
Uh-huh.
obviously they show up day in and day out to see that progress. But I also think whether it's hit them yet or not, some of those younger athletes are also going to understand probably where I didn't early on the importance of just longevity and being able to put time in under the bar or under some weight over your timeline, so it's not just about your athletic career, that it's
Mhm.
about longevity and health and wellness of your life.
Mhm. No, that's great. And I think there's going to be a lot of great messages that we're going to talk about how VALD kind of facilitates that type of buy-in and that understanding and education, because that's really what it is. And we all look back to like when we grew up, right? We didn't have all of these tools, but we also didn't have as much education or understanding at that point in time, right? So technologies like VALD and systems like this, it really helps to facilitate more than just the testing application, facilitates all of this other cascading effects, right? Like you get buy-in, you get understanding, you get to really learn about how your body is responding to things, which is, I think, invaluable for anybody in life, really, not only athletes, right? I wanted to touch on one other thing, and this is kind of my little advocating for VALD, right? Because anybody that's spent time in a research lab doing some of this testing alone. So, to give a little backstory, I had this conversation with you. The first time I met you, I thought, like, yep, this makes sense. Let's see what we can do to get VALD. Because in a research lab, so Trevor is the sports scientist at University of Hawaii and my colleague. We were doing jump testing on our research grade force plate. And that required us to write the whole script, program this, get the outputs that we need. And me being a PhD student at the time, that process took months and we had to get colleagues involved because you're doing everything manually, right? And just it's kind of ridiculous to compare that to how good you guys have made your interface user friendly, how fast it's responding, how much data you can get right off the click of a button. Because in a research based lab, That is not the case. Once you get it up and running, it's similar, but it's still not as fast as what you guys have done for the clinical setting or practitioner. So that alone, that I think justifies the subscription model. The service too, I also want to tip my hat to you guys. Unfortunately, it happens, but we had a force plate go out, right? And we just kind of got it. It's new, but it's just one of those things that the hardware, it was probably a little, not functioning or not
Yeah,
one
and
of those
anything can
things that,
happen, right?
yeah, anything that can happen. And then as soon as I got it to you, and I'm out in Hawaii, I was so surprised because within a week, I think it was like 5 days, the replacement force plate came in. We shipped the faulty force plate over and we're up and running and we didn't even lose a step in week to week neuromuscular testing. Of course, we have multiple force plates, but still to have one force plate down, that kind of slows down the process. But for you guys to respond that quickly, that alone justifies the subscription model. So all of these little things, people don't really realize how easy or user friendly you have really made the system. VALD has really made the system. And that alone is part of the, big obstacle, I would say, in the clinical setting or the practice setting where you're dealing with sports teams or dealing with patients and clients. So, I gotta say, that's something great that your company has figured out and the business model that goes with it. So leading into that, or did you have anything to say about that?
No, I was just going to say, one, we appreciate obviously you guys and you saying that. I think the one thing that I'm always impressed with this company is we have always remained a clinician-driven company
Yeah.
first, right? We care more about what the clients feel than any of our own opinions on it, and we hope, and that's just kind of even just talking through that subscription model a little bit deeper, is like we hope that we don't have to have people's pain points in any other product to be able to see the value of that subscription model. But that those are when, for those that are listening that have had some of those issues come up that I had mentioned even in my previous job, that's what I've always gravitated towards. The benefits of the subscription model is not only are the servicing hardware, everything's covered, but then the upgrades. When we make these better, not if, but when we make these systems better, you're going to get those extra systems.
Mhm.
And so that way, then you don't feel like you're paying for,
Mhm.
potentially just the next model over and over again.
Mhm.
But you're really seeing the value of how it can play into where you are today and where you're going tomorrow.
Mhm. Yes, no, that's excellent. And that segues perfectly into, so now you got this job offer at VALD. It seems that all of your worlds are coming together and colliding in this kind of sports science space. Explain a little bit about where VALD was when you started and what the learning curve was like for you when you first got exposed to, because this is usually most of us. We're kind of familiar with one area of testing, but then you're exposed to this whole testing battery. And I know I'm going through that too. The learning curve is steep, but speak on your experiences. Where was VALD at? And what was that first year like, the learning experience, everything that you picked up from that early on stage at VALD?
Yeah, great. So the company itself, naturally the company started in 2015. We've grown pretty heavily since then, but I didn't obviously come until around 2020. So being as though the company had already been, very well established throughout not just the United States, but really across the globe, we didn't have necessarily all of our product line then. That was before dynamos, that was before smart speed. The groin bar had just become the force frame at that point. And so yeah, the kind of the numbers of it, I believe, employee number 9 in the United States. Now I was in the hundred something for the company. But the ninth employee for the United States. Nowadays, we're up to about 39. So we've almost multiplied by 4 at that point. And so really what it came down to is it was just a smaller company and everyone knew that they had to pick up a shovel and dig a little bit to build out a lot more of the communities and the relationships. And naturally, I enjoyed all of that. And that I didn't ever really look at it as like quote unquote sales, because I knew that the foundations of what we were doing and the problem that existed, all I really had to do was just go out there and talk to people and hear them out. Naturally, all of VALD systems have always tried to remain on four main pillars. They have to be validated, they have to be reliable, they have to be portable, and ideally they become cost efficient. Now, obviously, that becomes more of a specific of each individual person, whether they're cost efficient or not. But at least to a point to where it doesn't feel like you're creating this capital expense purchase at the very beginning and having to create a return on investment to recoup that over time, rather than keeping costs down and low from the entry point to allow yourself to be able to make money with it rather not for it.
Yeah.
And so um, I, at the time, was the business development manager for the entire West Coast. So that was basically everything west of the Mississippi. And then naturally, as I was traveling more, meeting more people, one of the strongest parts of being in this company is you just get to rub shoulders with really good people. That could be strength and conditioning heads, that could be athletic trainers, assistant athletic trainers, physical therapy, clinic owners. It could just be just about anybody in every setting. And that's the cool part, I think, about some of these systems, is that we're not trying to be everything for everybody. We don't want everyone to buy each system. We know that each of our systems has a time and a place for someone's clinical abilities or athletic abilities. And so we want to be the solution for you for when you need that tool in your toolbox. And so that, in a large way, is how, our selling philosophy is making sure that we are a need before we're a want. And from there, that's how we build better relationships, but that's how we also can help them reach their goals and be able to see them do what they've initially wanted to do, because the learning curve can be so steep in certain products. Whereas dynamometry, it's a little bit easier. It's an expression of force, whereas that same expression of force in a force plate becomes a little bit more summated on all the different metrics that can come from it. So it's meeting people where they're at, and then being able to help them see the next step up in the ladder, and being able to go from, understanding force and average force and peak force to then understanding impulse and velocities and how that's, focused around the left and right asymmetry. So yeah, I think that at the early stages, it was yet another fun time for me to be able to go back to learn and go back to school and learn it a little bit deeper. And one of the things that I always prioritize with our new clients is, if you're already familiar with XYZ metric, let's talk about where that's, you can make some strong, formidable outline and plans for using those metrics, but also where do you want to go 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, to utilize the system a little bit better and maybe get a little bit more captured value from it. Um, you know, I always we could probably get a little bit more into how to utilize those metrics, but it's in a large part, I always try to talk through how you have to know the rules in order to break them. When does evidence-based practice start becoming practice-based evidence?
Mhm.
And that's the joy of everything that we're doing as a company. We're probably going to get a lot things right with reporting and visualizations. It's just not going to be the right thing for everybody. But that's where I feel like the fundamentals of the product really speak to themselves, of where we're going and where things can go from there.
Yes. No, that's awesome. And it's interesting that you said that, because we're going to kind of transition now into this ever rapidly growing world of sports science, right? And it's because it's becoming more mainstream because of products and companies like you, right? We have all of these technologies that we couldn't apply in a real world setting, right? Whether that be a PT clinic, a hospital, or an elite sports setting, right? We would have to, in order to test that kind of population, pull them out of their native kind of training setting or native whatever they're doing activity wise throughout the day and test them in this research lab that comes with limitations itself, right? But now we're having these systems either wearable technology, force plates, smart speed timing gates, right, that we take out literally to them. And we can collect data like we've never collected before. We can track them longitudinally throughout a season without bringing them back every like 3 months, right? So we're getting all of this data that we never really had before. And we're using people with experience, clinical experience, research experience to look at this data and really apply scientific principles to the real world setting, right? And we're getting a whole different realm of understanding that goes, like you said, it might be practice-based evidence eventually that goes beyond what we can do with research, right? So these two worlds are going to collide, kind of the academic research world, the clinical practical setting, even more in the next few years. But my question to you is, let's start with your 3 years there, talking to all of these different people, getting people kind of familiarized with sports science and how to look at data, how to collect data accurately. I like what you said, making sure that it's reliable, but it's also cost effective and efficient for them, right? How to get all of them or everyone to understand where we're going with sports science. What has the evolution been like for someone that's doing sports science or teaching people, educating people about sports science every day? What has the evolution been like in your 3 years there?
Huh, good question. It's a we could probably spend a whole nother hour
Yes.
unpacking that one. I think the fundamental premise is that it's a merging of multiple professions, right? We're talking about not just the physiological expression when it comes to these systems. We're talking about external factors, stress and internal factors like sleep, mental health. We're bridging, the ability to say, time of day of when we're actually
Mhm.
assessing and testing and being able to look at the roadmap of why it's useful. Is it during practices? Is it during games? Is it off season, in season? Does it assist with our strength and conditioning programming, or is it just a way of taking baseline and check-ins, right? So I think the fundamental piece of where I'm optimistic of what I've been seeing over the last 3 years is we've gone away from this test to just test for the sake of testing and collecting data to now putting more and more reason into why we're assessing something. And I think this is a pretty well-known philosophy, just generally at this point, but it's something that we always talk about internally in the company as well, is making sure that we have a reason to test and collect data and what we're going to likely do with that data before we start just looking at everything. And naturally, if we bring that down into research principles, are we doing a prospective analysis or a retrospective analysis? Each of those come with its own pros and cons. And so by naturally, all my studying, all my student internships and everything always told me, why are you doing this? Always ask yourself why. And I think I naturally have always, just made that part of my premise, but it's one of those fundamental things that I think it's important to just continue to remember is that you don't have to be the PhD tomorrow,
Mhm.
right? The the beauty of having the PhD, of course, is the letters at the end of your name, but it's also what got you there. The knowledge of puts you in front of those letters. And so if we always kind of make sure that we're starting with fundamental principles of why are you testing, then we can start making, just by using the scientific principles, a really good educated guess and hypothesis of where I think it's going to take me. I think what we still need to do as a group, and I'm just very, very talking large group at this point, is we just need to continue a better job of taking the results of what we get and putting it back into that scientific principle of now let's revise and make a new educated hypothesis and guess of where we're going. I think we always want to make sure that we have just the silver bullet and the correct answer right out of the gate, and that probably stops a lot of people from starting at the beginning. So like I said, we're probably pulling too many things from a large topic down into one, but I'd say the biggest thing I'm most excited about in the last 3 years is watching people go from all aspects of their own knowledge and experience and expertise and finding something that's going to level themselves up. And that could be in, when I chat with a strength and conditioning director about some simple principles that they don't necessarily quite fully grasp or understand. I don't look at that as like, oh my gosh, how do you not know this? For where you are in your profession or where you are in your career from a position perspective, I think it's just there's so much to learn
Yeah.
and there's so much to do. And between physical therapy, so looking at it from more of a healthcare rehab perspective versus strength and conditioning, looking at it more from a performance perspective, there's millions and millions of pages and textbooks to be able to tell us where we need to go. The sports science field, like you had already alluded to, it's in its infancy. The wild, wild west is still out there for how we're taking this data and making changes to it. So as long as we're doing so in a productive light and we're doing so with first principles in mind, I'm very excited about the future and the publications that will eventually come out of it because naturally research is always going to play catch up to practice and evidence or practice-based evidence. And so as we continue to do that, that's where naturally, some metrics are going to phase out, more metrics are going to phase in, but the understanding of how to influence these metrics that's what's really going to come out of it.
Yeah. No, I liked how you explained everything there. And it's, getting all of us to use this data and have this kind of forward thinking or thought process to, like you said, keep recycling that, throw it back in the system. Maybe because we saw this might be the better way to approach X, Y, and Z, right? And then you keep doing that. And I liked how you said it too, because now it's becoming so mainstream and widespread that we shouldn't just test to test. We shouldn't just take this protocol that's working in this setting and apply it to our patients without actually analyzing the why. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve with this? What are we thinking is going to help improve this, right? So it's kind of taking what has been done. There's so many things out there and resources like you guys that can help us to figure out how to actually apply sports science principles, but also don't be so rigid in that and have that curiosity as you go forward because things are going to start to evolve and you're going to take steps on steps, right? The other thing that I wanted to touch on with that, which I think you guys have done an excellent job, and I enjoy all of our discussions with any one of your colleagues too, is that you guys really spend time on the customer service side, customer relations side, and have a lot of educational material. I mean, even from your starter guides to your webinars. And for anyone that's interested in maybe sports science, I would say just start there because you can just search up VALD webinars and you guys have all a list of their webinars, people talking about their experiences or, people that have a little bit more experience in that testing battery or that technology. They're speaking on their experience to kind of get you up to speed per se, right? So that's something that how you said no one knows everything. And even as athletic trainers, physical therapists, right? There's so many things to learn. And even for me as well, like I don't know everything about force plates, but that's where I feel the most comfortable, right? But when it comes to other systems, there's so many other things to learn as far as like how am I actually going to test this, collect the data, logistical things, how do I interpret the data? Okay, how is this going to affect processes and decision making, right? All of the scientific principle things that you just mentioned. So I want to segue into let's briefly talk about, and maybe this is the first time some listeners are hearing anything about these type of technologies and testing batteries, or it might be someone that has experience using this. Let's go around and just briefly explain what tools VALD offers, right? And maybe give some examples of how this applies or what is the typical setting that this is being utilized the most, right? I'll let you go in any order. Of course, I'm going to have the most questions about force plates, but like let's go into any order and just give a little brief segment on this is what this is. These are some of the ways that it's being utilized now, and it seems to do well in this type of setting or demographic.
Great. All right, well, let's start with the original VALD product, the Nord board. So the Nord board, for those that aren't familiar, if you're familiar with at least the Nordic hamstring curl, where someone's holding your ankles as they're on their knees, and then you kind of lower yourself down, utilizing mostly your hamstrings, but your posterior chain to prevent yourself from falling on your face. Well, the Nord board is more or less just we've replaced holding the ankles with two tension-based load cell hooks. And so that way, then as you're lowering yourself down, you're able to look at how much strength is going through your left versus your right hamstring and posterior chain. It's a very performance heavy exercise. And so then it becomes a very performance heavy system. Naturally, it's a dynamometer that then looks at eccentric and potentially even then concentric and isometric strength. So it is a way of interpreting muscle capacity in a unique way compared to our other strength assessment devices like the force frame or the dynamo. So it's heavily utilized for hamstring, posterior chain rehab, but also overall training. And now that we know that some serial sarcomerogenesis, so more or less increasing muscle fiber length, has been shown to be one of the more primary reasons for reducing the likelihood of hamstring issues or injuries, then eccentric strength training becomes a really important way of doing that. And so by sake of which, then we get off of just testing and looking at it more from training. So that's where the benefits of NordBoard really become this idea around, can we do baseline testing as well as training along the way throughout the season to be able to not only enhance some of those sarcomeres at the muscular fiber level, but also potentially reducing a recurring or an initial injury.
Mhm.
The force frame and the dynamo, now these are basically the same type of system with one key difference. So the dynamo, they're both isometric dynamometers. The dynamo and the range of dynamos, we have Dynamo Plus, Dynamo Light, and Dynamo Max. They more or less are all focused around portable dynamometry. So in the palm of your hand, being able to put it into an athletic training bag, being able to get it in and around any type of system or protocol, it becomes really valuable in that sense. Whereas the force frame, what it loses in portability, because it's this larger H frame fixed device, it enhances somewhat of the reliability of the data because you can set it up in a very specific way. So no matter who's setting it up, if it's Andrew, if it's me, or anybody else in our setting, now we have the ability to go back to the exact same setup, no matter which athlete it is in the given protocol. So you enhance this idea around reliability. Of course, you can maintain reliability pretty easily in a handheld dynamometer. It just takes a little bit more time and attention for protocol setup. So between the two, they offer strength and the ability to assess strength. Of course, the limitation of an isometric dynamometer comparatively to, let's say, the isokinetic dynamometers that I previously talked about is that it looks at the expression of strength of a muscle group in that exact degree of range of motion. So if you were to need to assess across an entire pathway of a muscle or the joint region, then you would have to assess a few different muscle ranges. But if you're testing generally at mid range of a range of motion, then you're probably going to get the highest expression of those cross bridges and muscle fiber tension. And so that's naturally what the research would suggest that you do. So all of those are going to be expressions of force in a level of assessing strength. And naturally, that's going to be highly useful for return to play, rehab progressions, as well as looking at baseline to any level of monitoring for performance. So then we move, let's say, we'll save the force plates for last for you, Andrew. So we'll get outside of force a little bit, and then we'll go into our motion capture analysis system, the human track. And so while the force decks or force plates are utilizing kinetic data, so ground reaction force data, the motion capture analysis system, the human track, will look at kinematics, so joint angle positions throughout a dynamic or a static sense of movement. So whether that's a squat, whether that's a lunge, you're standing and doing rotation of the trunk, of the shoulder, of the neck, it's going to be able to give you a highly reliable value of range of motion for certain key metrics. And now that might be, let's say, if we're looking at side bending of the cervical spine, not only will it give you left versus right side bending, but it'll also give you some indication of compensation. So are you tilting the remainder of your shoulders, which is theoretically leading to more side bending of the cervical spine, but realistically, you're just bending at the remainder of the spine and going into lumbar side flexion. And so the motion capture analysis obviously does a really good job for being able to give very quick and easy motion capture without having to put a goniometer in and around their space. And so that's probably the biggest indicator there is going to be a test and retest solution. So whether that's utilized more for chiropractors, more for physical therapists, athletic trainers, maybe a little bit less in strength and conditioning, mostly because if you are expected to gain range of motion, you're probably only going to do so in larger time periods, right? 3, 5, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, up to depending on the level of attack that you're going for. But naturally, there's always going to be some value of looking at kinematics in the middle of that as well. It's just whether or not we're expecting that minimum detectable change that we talked about earlier. So then we move over into the timing gates. So our smart speed timing gates, those are going to be primarily looking at acceleration, deceleration, total velocity times, split times, change of direction. And I think where naturally a stopwatch can do an okay job, and of course there's plenty of laser and competitor products out there, I think what the value of what the smart speed provides is what's called error correction processing. So error correction processing is being able to look at not just when the body had initially broken the field to assess that accurate time, but it also looks at whether a period of time right after it was initially triggered to see what was the longest amount of capture in that field of time. And what it does is it's very research backed and validated to showcase that if someone were to, let's say, break the plane with their arm first, maybe that's not going to be as accurate because we want the trunk to be what's captured. And so what error correction processing does is it guarantees that the trunk is what's being captured each rep, rather than any extraneous limb or movement in it. And so you just get this higher accuracy and more of a vote of confidence that the time that you're getting is not just reliable, but it is validated as well. And so as you're going from change of direction left side, change of direction right side, acceleration in your first 5 meters, yards to the top velocities, it does an exceptional job of being able to capture all of those as long as you set up the parameters accordingly. All right, so now we move more. We have blood flow restriction cuffs. So our Air Bands is a one-time purchase. So that's not on the subscription model, but they are wireless Bluetooth-oriented blood flow restriction cuffs. And of course, there's a lot of research out there for how blood flow restriction can enhance hypertrophy at the muscular level, but also potentially help with recovery and some flush cycles as well. So I'd highly recommend anyone being able to look up some of those. Andrew had mentioned the webinars. There's actually a really good webinar on that as well, just to talk through the science behind it and the evidence, very, very highly evidence-backed. So again, a lot of good principles for performance as well as healthcare. All right, and then naturally we have one of the more long forgotten type of products that we're trying to put back into the forefront is our only free product. So yes, we actually do have a free product that anyone could and should be able to more or less sign up for today and use, which is our exercise prescription platform. So now it's called Move Health. It was called Telehab. And basically what it does is where all of our data flows into one central place called the hub. And in that same hub, there's a program builder to allow you to create any program you'd want, whether it's an exercise program, a strength and conditioning program, you want to put in supersets. The value and the benefit of what Telehab provides is it offers kind of 4 main parameters that I kind of like that I haven't really seen in too many other platforms. One is it allows you to put or have the athlete or the client or the patient put in RPE, so how much rate preserved exertion there was. Pain score 0 to 10. So if they're in active pain, how much pain were they in each individual exercise? It allows you to record it So that way, then it can send the video back to the practitioner to be able to review it on their own time. And it opens up a text chat box so that you can start opening up some communication without giving out your cell phone. All of that data then flows back into the hub all the same. So then you can look at adherence. So are they actually doing it? And then compliance. Are they doing it well? And of course, then that leads to probably half the improvements that we're trying to get anyway, is not what they're doing within the four walls while they're in front of you, but also what they're doing outside of those walls away from you. And so then the force plates, of course, we have all of our force plates with three different sizes and models. They range between more portable versus more surface area. And so depending on if you need to bring them in a plane and check them over, or I'm sorry, even carry on in a plane, then our Force Deck Minis are perfect for you. If you want to keep them embedded in the floor, then our Force Deck Maxes are probably better for you. And then our middle size or Force Deck Lite, which you guys have, those are the best of both worlds. They offer portability, but also enough surface area that you're not really too worried about anyone missing the plates. And those are uniaxial force plates. So as we talked about, some of those other force plates, Vertex and things that you would find in a PhD lab, these are looking primarily at that vertical axis and everything that comes with them. And so the utility of what we've already talked about is so vast that, long gone are the days where we're only looking at sports specific testing for when it comes to these plates. So you could do balance testing, whether it's quiet stand, narrow base of support, semi-tandem, tandem, eyes open, eyes closed. They're sensitive enough to be able to put an AirX pad or a compliant surface on top of it and still look at center of pressure and sway. So whether that's an older adult, and there's a lot of evidence around balance assessment, center of pressure movement when it comes to fall risk. But then you can also put it on for concussion testing, pre and post, and looking at how much sway is going on in some of these more challenging conditions compared to eyes open and no compliant surface. Then you can, of course, do isometric tests like we've talked about with some of the force frame and dynamo, but that might be something a little bit more stronger, like a mid-thigh pull or an iso squat, a belt squat. You could, of course, do upper extremity tests like ASH testing and push-ups. And then all the various things with the lower extremity or the full body, whether it's a squat analysis or a loaded squat. If you wanted to do deadlifts, theoretically, you could do those as well. And then all the different jumps and things looking at reactive strength. And so very, very highly utilized. It just depends on, what clientele you're seeing.
Yes. No, that's a very comprehensive overview. And of course, it gets a lot deeper when you get into the details, right? But I want to really emphasize that all of this data, so if you're using multiple systems, all of this data gets filtered and uploaded to the cloud database into your VALD hub, and you can see it pretty much in real time, right? Why don't you explain a little bit about that and kind of what the experience is like from the clinician standpoint, I guess? Obviously, you guys have created this great product that you're looking at data in real time. I mean, to the point where you can have a team or patients jumping and you can put up the leaderboard for that group, you've thought of all of these innovative ways, probably based off of feedback, that really help to make this user interface friendly, right? So explain a little bit about the VALD hub and what that experience is like for people that might not be familiar.
Yeah, well, if we go back to the big pain points that I had, that was probably the largest one, is how do I actually get the data that I want to be able to then utilize it when I need it? When I was using that old handheld dynamometer that I had in my first job, and really the kind of the state of where a non-digital asset like these come into play is, they're all relative analog or digital on their own user face. And so, naturally I would test, I would look at it, I would write it down, whether it's a Post-it note, whether it's an Excel. And I had some really crazy Excel sheets at one point as well. You write it down, you reset it, you make sure the protocol is exactly how it was for rep 1. You look at it again, you write it down, you reset it, and you're doing 2, 3, 5 reps even sometimes. And the problem is that you'd get pretty good at that. You'd get enough instantaneous feedback where you could look at that sheet and say, okay, your first 3 were the strongest. If I take your top peak compared to your left, your right. I can do a really simple equation for looking at limb symmetry index, but it does take little bits of time. But the problem I found was is then if you're retesting, let's say I was testing someone who I tested the first time 3, 4, 5 visits ago. And if I didn't remember exactly when I tested them, then I'd say, all right, hold on real quick. I'm going to go look up your previous score. And you find 2, 3 different notes, and you're like, no, that wasn't that day. And finally, you find it just to look over. You compare it to today's note, and sure enough, they're the same. They're no better. So you spend 5 minutes basically just determining that the data is more or less moot and you're just trusting the process, you're moving forward. That happens more times than you'd like. And so I think the benefit of having this digital display in real time, you're exactly right. As soon as that rep is over, whether it's a jump, whether it's a push or a pull, that data is right there in front of you. And then it compares it to every other rep within that session. But also now in the app, there is longitudinal tracking for how that compares to previous sessions as well. And it gives percentages, it gives, up arrows, down arrows. It makes it really clean and easy for you to be able to make a decision right there, then on the fly, but also then storing it to be able to review later on. Yeah. And so I think one of the nice parts, at least that I found clinically about the dashboards, is in the moment, you probably don't need 220 metrics. One counter movement jump immediately analyzes 220 metrics as soon as that jump's over. But you shouldn't probably be looking at 220 metrics in the moment. You probably are only looking at 2, 3, maybe 4 metrics and how they relate to each other, right? And so where the nice part is this app interface, you can decide what metrics you want to visualize given each test type, and then what metrics you want to see based theoretically off of the patients in front of you. But then the hub where all that data lives, all the other 214 metrics are still there, ready to be accessed and accessible whenever you might need it. And so that's where then the hub becomes really easy, because if you need to, you can really quickly rip a report, put it into your clinical note, put it into your dashboard, or wherever you might need to store that for other decision makers, whether it's mom and dad, whether it's coach, whether it's the athletic director or your clinic director, or even just the person right in front of you may need it. Now you can just as easily hit print, or if you have an integration or an API set up, be able to just have that sync over seamlessly. But that's the value of what we were talking about. This onboarding curve is that no matter where you are, no matter where you're starting, there's this ability to then go back in and learn. So if you took a course and learned about rate of force development over the weekend, Monday morning, you can go right into your hub, change everything to rate of force development, and then start capturing that all the same.
Yeah. The possibilities are really endless. And I like that you guys export all of this raw data. And again, just to share a little perspective, it's very quick. The user interface, I mean, you can collect data from your iPhone on the app, right? So sometimes if I don't have my laptop there, I'm not running like a lot of teams or whatever it is. I just want to say, you know what, let's do a quick jump, warm you up real quick, pull out my phone, test them right there using the app, right? Connect it to whatever system I'm using. And then from there, it just gets uploaded straight to the hub, go to my laptop, and it's right there. When we're doing it like in a research base, area, and we didn't have everything 100% automized, but we had a lot of things automated, but it took us maybe like 30 minutes to get the jumps done, do the data, transfer it over to the AMS system, and then actually see all the visualization. 30 minutes, right? Now I'm talking about less than 30 seconds if I really want to see it. So that's the value. That's what you're paying for really with the subscription model. You can try to set it up by yourself if you're, a computer programmer or something like that, but it's made so easily accessible for the practitioner that it's being so valuable in every single setting, right? I just have two more questions. I know we're both busy. So the first question is, how is this spilling into all of the different settings? Like, what are you seeing currently right now? How are sports science tools or this kind of tools being utilized like how it hasn't been before? And what are the trends that you're seeing currently?
Yeah, and so that probably brings up the one piece of the subscription model that we haven't really touched on yet, which I also think is a massive value add in and of itself, which is our normative data reports.
Hmm.
We have 77 at the moment, 77 normative data reports that focus on specific demographics, right? So whether you're a mountain sport athlete or coach, whether you see mostly youth teams or high school athletics or college baseball, youth baseball, whatever it might be, we have likely a report for it to be able to compare not just the team in front of you, the person in front of you, but how it compares across the nation and potentially even the globe. And where that becomes extremely valuable is a lot of these teams and coaches and otherwise different settings worldwide are starting to feel heard, right? Because there's not going to be, in a lot of ways, normative data up until this point is really just based in the evidence, in the research. And if someone took the time and attention to collect this data and then publish it, then it's out there for everybody. But the challenge is that when it comes to research-backed funding right now, these aren't research projects that any IRB is going to, or any larger institution is going to fund. So they're just really not being conducted anymore. And naturally, we have this large preponderance of data in this data set that then we can utilize and somewhat give back to the professions to be able to enhance their own clinical abilities. And so I think, naturally, our main verticals are tactical, performance, and health. Tactical being all five branches of the military, as well as private sector like NASA. And one of the more exciting times is we're getting more into police, fire, and emergency response. And so, while they have very real problems like their health insurance and workers' compensation, if their injuries are pretty traumatic to where it's putting them out of the workforce for long periods of time and potentially career-ending issues. And so, where I'm seeing a lot of these tactical groups from a fire and police response perspective is they're bringing these systems in-house to be able to enhance their ability to bring insurance in-house and be able to have their own counties and healthcare professionals be able to work with them to get them back to where they need to go, so it doesn't take up so many tax dollars to be able to work with workers' compensation. So that's on the tactical side. And the performance side, naturally, that's going to include everything professional, semi-professional, governing bodies, collegiate athletics, but now getting into more high schools. And, I think that there's probably worth a discussion in another day for, how young should we be getting some data on kids to enhance performance versus knowing time is going to tell a lot as well. And like we said, time under tension even more.
Yeah.
But at least getting to this point to where if we're picking up the trends where mom and dad really want their kids to excel and probably even just stay safe by being on the athletic field more, then we're providing an opportunity for them to actually show that they're getting better and actually maybe hopefully expose some of these coaches that aren't doing the right things or maybe doing less than ideal principles that today may not fly, whereas back in the 80s, 90s, maybe they did a little bit more because we didn't have all the information that we have now. So I think the health and well-being of youth athletics is another big part of it. And then, of course, the health side. And I think that where naturally chiropractors, athletic trainers, physical therapists have always had this mainstay of utilizing these systems. Now we're starting to see podiatrists, health groups, full hospital networks, orthopedic surgeons putting these in their waiting rooms so that, with the 20 minutes that you're waiting for the doc to come in, the medical assistant can just assess your squats, assess your balance. And just like the doc would put up the x-ray and kind of say, here's where you're at today, 6, 8 weeks in. They also might have some normative data to compare to say, you know what, you're not squatting as deep as you probably should be. Let's get you back in front of that athletic trainer or physical therapist to make sure that the next time I see you, you're hitting these other benchmarks, which is really exciting. So, full across all three of our verticals, we're seeing full integration. And that's that's the beauty of it, right? So that goes back to that first principle that we talked about, which is we're not trying to be everything for everybody. We don't want to have a physical therapy clinic buy all 8 of our systems unless they have a need for all of that data. But that's where the exciting piece of where we're going is finding some of these pockets of healthcare performance and tactical that could utilize some data, and getting started with that data is, my passion.
Yes. I know we can talk for hours and hours, and this is a loaded question again, but in your experience, if you look into your crystal ball with how much advancements we have in the actual hardware and technology, of course, software, AI capabilities, right? What's your best prediction of where do you see sports science going in maybe even the next 2 to 5 years? Because it's exponentially growing. So what would you say, just where do you see it going and why should people be interested and jump on board?
Well, what I'm most interested in, I think, is this idea around pathological normative data, right? Something that we've never really had a good grasp on. The research probably is, too heterogeneous to really kind of dictate how to make a good research report on this, that I think, VALD has a strong ability to help with, is this idea around where should someone be 1 week out of an ankle sprain or 3 months out of a total knee replacement. So not only to be able to dictate how someone's improving, but ideally, how close can we get to know that someone has gone off the beaten path of where they should be? And by one recorrection of an intervention or by one more conversation or discussion, we might be able to put them back on an appropriate path. Now, that's probably the athletic trainer, physical therapist in me talking, because, I've seen that problem day in and day out where as a younger or newer clinician, you're focusing on trusting the process. You know the principles in place, but you don't really know when someone's coming back with that little bit of extra pain that you thought they'd kind of be better by now. What direction do you take it? And I think that having some data outside of patient-reported outcomes, which are phenomenal and definitely the mainstay right now for assessing progress, I think that the pathological norms are going to help the profession really be able to get back into doing what they say they're going to do, which is helping people. That's it also goes back to like where things could go. Now, VALD has always taken a somewhat of a stance of not ever creating a decision tree of because of this, do this, right?
Mhm.
And basically cookie cutter approaches to intervention strategy or getting there. I think AI and
Mhm.
motor learning in a lot of ways, machine learning is going to probably put us closer into that pendulum. The pendulum probably going to swing there a little bit, hopefully not as much as, I've seen some other companies go into, but it just runs the risk of, the human body is a very complex organism, and we're not going to be able to say because of these 4 or 5 indicators, this is where
Mhm.
things are going. Now, ideally, we take some of that in some degree to help with this idea around risk reduction of injury. It's a golden goose we'll probably never touch because, how could you ever predict that you've saved an injury, right? But I think from a level of health, well-being, performance, we have the ability to get closer to that without, burning the bridges behind us. And so that's what I'm really eager and excited about. Again, I think that we're really focusing on just reducing pain points. And if we can help someone who's struggled with collecting data to help them collect data in a much more efficient and easier way, being able to take intervention strategy to a next level, or even just reason through why one data point is less important than another. These are the exciting pieces of where we're going.
Yes, exactly. It's constantly evolving and it's very exciting to see where it's headed. But also, it's going to help so many people, I think, just collecting more data, understanding why certain things are happening. And we might not be able to understand the intricacies of the human body, but again, we're moving in the right direction, right? So thanks for sharing all of this. I know we can talk for way longer. Sorry to keep you a little longer too.
Not at all.
Other than that, do you have any last words that you want to share with anybody that listens to this?
Yeah, no, I obviously appreciate everyone listening in and hearing a little bit about my story and where VALD's at. I think that if you're curious about objective test and measurement solutions, if you just want to have a conversation of whether it's a good fit for your setting, by no means are we an aggressive bunch. All of our reps are either strength and conditioning coaches, physical therapists, athletic trainers to some degree as a previous career. And so we're just happy to have a conversation. And, my passion is raising the floor of clinical practice through the use of objective test and measurement solutions. So if I can help you just understand how valuable data can be, then I know I've done my job. But yeah, happy to have a conversation with anybody. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter. I'll give you my email address if you'd like to post it as well in the show notes. But yeah, eager to have a conversation.
Yes, I'll post all of that in the show notes so people can find it, look it up. And it's always great talking to you as well. So thank you so much for sharing everything. And I always look forward to talking to you more. We might have to do a follow-up, go a little deeper, but thank you again for joining me today.
Already ready for part two. I really appreciate it, Andrew. It was great seeing you, great chatting, and yeah, have a great day.